Good evening, everybody. I'm Brian Mallow, and you probably know that because you're on my channel already, but I think it's kind of obligatory to say it. So that little message was for anyone that might see this on replay. This is day 2 of the great streaming experience, and it's going to be loose, but I prepared a couple special new things that I didn't have yesterday. We'll play some clips, and I'm gonna check how things are going because this is also new. But what I discovered is that although everything was fine with the live stream last night, for some reason, the Facebook version of the video on playback on an iPhone, the audio and the video are completely out of sync. So that's not a problem over on Twitter, and it's not a problem over on YouTube. And today I added LinkedIn, so I'm also streaming, I think, to my LinkedIn page. So I'm gonna pull this up and see if we're on. Actually, I don't have any indication that we are. Hey, Chuck. Chuck Pell says, hey, let's see what this looks like. If we go to this, Chuck says, happy quantified existence, Brian. Thanks, Chuck. So, yeah, gonna do a couple of new experiences or experiments tonight. I set up a couple new Alberts out there too. Albert and Chuck are watching. The AV is in sync. Yeah, so this was very strange. It was in sync on an iPhone last night when it was live, but the replay video, I don't even need you to confirm this. I guess I've confirmed it, but you could. The video that's on Facebook from last night of me talking to the camera, if you watch it on the desktop, it's fine. If you watch it on YouTube or Twitter, it's fine. But if you watch it on an iPhone, it's completely out of sync. And it's even weirder than that because I sent the Facebook link, I texted it to a friend. Within the text messaging app on the iPhone, if I played that Facebook video and just watched it right there, totally in sync. But if you click it in that way that it launches the Facebook app, it's out of sync. So that's pretty weird. I changed a couple settings that I don't think are relevant, but you do what you can. So I'm glad that this is in sync. Hey, Elena. Hey, Susan. Hey, Nate Etheridge. How you doing? But hey, Nate, I have something for you that you have never seen before. Did I play you anything from Starmus? I have queued up some Steve Vai. So Nate, tell me you're out there. Make a comment here on Facebook and I'll play something for you. Chuck says, Elena says, how could it be weirder than that? Susan, as if I'd let them watch without me. And Chuck says, explainable if you consider the temporal distortion field induced by the C-19 situation. Yeah, the C-19 situation that canceled. I should be in California. I should be in Northern California right now. And tomorrow for lunch, I should be having a mission-style burrito at La Cumbre at 16th and Valencia that I miss and crave so much. Hey, Chuck, I didn't line that up, but 39 is one of my favorite Queen songs. I mean, how many folk songs have ever been written about relativistic space journeys? I think one. And who could have written it? There can be only one, Brian May. So I do have from the Starmus dress rehearsal, Brian May singing 39, backed up by Hans Zimmer and a 42-piece orchestra and like a 32-piece choir. It's pretty phenomenal, but that's not what I brought. I just very quickly lined up a couple clips, and excuse me, I didn't you know how the internet is? I have some very exclusive content. What I'm going to show you by Steve Vai is kind of amazing, and I'm the only person who has it. Because there's some things that happened at the dress rehearsal that did not happen at the show. And Elena says, who's Brian May? But she is joking, and it's a joke in poor taste. So, I don't know, are you there, Nate? Did I lose you? Are you still out there? Because this is really for you. The Brian May who messaged you after the concert, when I was out to dinner with you, that's the Brian May. So I'll tell you what, this one I may have to play more than once. So let me go ahead and show you one, and let's see what it's like to go to a clip. But here are my excuses. Let me just say, I didn't want to release this without like a watermark. And I very quickly just threw @ScienceComedian on top of the video, but I didn't do it in my editing software. I did it in this mixing software, and I can't make it semi-transparent. I couldn't affect the that, so it's just on there, and I'm sorry, but you'll understand when you see. Okay, so Starmus. For those of you who don't know, last summer I attended this. It was the 5th incarnation. It happens about every 2 years. Star and Music, Starmus. And it was this amazing event in Zurich last summer, and there were scientists and rock stars. Brian May, the musical curator was Hans Zimmer, and then there was Brian May and Steve Vai and Rick Wakeman from Yes. And so there were also astronauts and astrophysicists. There were 3 or 4 men that walked on the moon, 7 Apollo astronauts, 3 or 4 moonwalkers, Buzz Aldrin. I co-hosted the opening ceremony, and in the front row, Peter Gabriel and Brian Eno and Buzz Aldrin. It was insane. It was surreal, like no other event I've been involved in. And during the dress rehearsal, a couple hours before the show, Commander Chris Hadfield, badass astronaut, commanded several missions, went to the ISS a couple times, flew shuttles and other spacecraft. He's amazing, and he's an incredible communicator. And if you remember, when he was on the ISS, he plays guitar, and he made a little rock video for his version of Space Oddity by David Bowie. And I got to introduce him, talk to him on stage, and then he played Space Oddity. During the dress rehearsal, Steve Vai was playing on that song, and Rick Wakeman was, but they decided that Steve has a big solo, and so they took him off of Space Oddity and let it just be Rick Wakeman and the orchestra and Chris Hadfield. It's all so surreal. So check this out. This is, I don't want to oversell it, but it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen or heard. And it's only about 30 seconds. I didn't know this was gonna happen. I'm at the dress rehearsal. At that moment, didn't have to do anything. Chris Hadfield is playing Space Oddity. So they're already playing it, and Steve Vai does something, and I'm the only person who has this, because this didn't happen in the show. The show was recorded, but tell me what you think of this. How badass is this? Here's Steve Vai with Chris Hadfield and Rick Wakeman and the Hans Zimmer Orchestra.
Detached from the station and make us love be with you.
Did I oversell it? Because I think that is just the coolest. I think it sounds better than the studio version. I just think that was insane. So who else is here? Mary Zimmer, Wakeman Astronauts. Hey, Romeo. Yes, Susan. Hey, Jim. Are you really out there? You know, I dropped your name last night. I mentioned Play TV. Last night, I did my first new streaming experiment. And I mentioned Play TV, and I mentioned you in particular. So I mentioned last night that 20 years ago, I had a live streaming show, and one of the other guys lives up in Canada, Jim Browning, was Revelstoke Jim. So I'm experimenting with some new stuff, Jim, and if you're out there, I'll tell you what I'm using. But a lot of comments. Hey, Pete. Hi, Sky. Check. So let's do that one more time. But Jim, if you're watching, I'm using OBS, and I'm using a camcorder into my MacBook Pro using OBS, and I have this little stream deck that I can queue up different, a couple clips I have set and different scenes. Like I can go to this scene that shows the chat. Right now my monitor's a little far away, so I really can't read it over there, but you can. And yeah, Steve freaking Vai. Steve, you know, I gotta say that I had, of course, always heard of Steve Vai, but I wasn't that familiar with his music. But then when I met him, he was so nice. And I'm gonna play you he sat for a half-hour interview with me on another day that I was hosting. While a program was going on, we went into a room and talked for like half an hour until I had to get back on stage. And he was so nice. So since Starmus, I've listened to a lot of his music, and he's just phenomenal. But let's just see that one more time because I can't get enough of it.
Detach from the station and make us love be with you.
I love it. I can't get enough of it. So, I brought a couple of clips. I brought 3 other clips. One is at the dress rehearsal, Steve Vai playing his song called For the Love of God. And it's just a jam. It's really good. It's one of his classic songs, and he's playing with the Hans Zimmer Orchestra, but because I knew that during the show I wouldn't be able to do this, during the dress rehearsal, I went up close and shot, but I was really close to Steve's amp, so it's mostly his guitar. You can't hear the orchestra very well, but they were there. I was just close to Steve's amp. So I brought another music clip of Steve. I brought an interview with Steve that we'll watch just a little of. And Jill Tarter, who, if you've ever seen the movie Contact or read the book, the main character is based on Jill Tarter. She's the co-founder of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and she's just an awesome astronomer, and she's very interested in the possibility of life and technological life in the universe. And so we did a very short interview, but she was very nice and very cool, and she's a board member of that Starmus event. So I also said, amp is greater than a 42-piece orchestra with Hans Zimmer. I said ask me anything because that way I don't have to prepare content. I can just answer your question. So Jill Tarter sets the bar. She is very cool. So many cool people were at this thing. So yeah, should we just check out another one? But if you have anything like a topic, bring it on. How about we watch a little Jill Tarter? You know, the whole interview is about 8 or 9 minutes, but I don't know how much you want to sit through right now, but mostly I wanted to do this as a test to see what it's like to play clips, come back to me, stuff like that. You know, go to the chat. Pete says, come to Toronto, and I'd love to. Help me get a gig, you know? I need somebody to bring me to Toronto, and I actually am working on that. I'm working on it. But if you have any ideas of someone that would bring me in, the last time I was in Toronto, I was involved in a show for IFLS, I Fucking Love Science, that popular Facebook page. And we did a show at the Ontario Science Center. And there were some very cool science and entertainment people on the show. Phil Plait, the bad astronomer, was there, and Karen Bondar, who's a great scientist, former scientist, more of a science communicator now, and author. These guys, ASAP Science, were there. They're popular video. Oh, all of these science YouTubers. Derek Muller, Veritasium, fantastic. He co-hosted with Elise, the founder of IFLS, and Henry, what's Henry's last name? Reich. Henry Reich, Minute Physics. He was there. And not only did he do some demos, he played a song. He's very multi-talented. I'm probably leaving some people out, but it was a fantastic show. You're my beta testers. Yes, Chuck. Chuck asked if I cried when May played 39 at that event. No, only because the whole thing, I was co-hosting, it was part of the opening ceremony. My co-host, Chase Masterson, is an actress who famously was a character on Star Trek Deep Space Nine for about 17 episodes. And she and I co-hosted, she got to introduce Brian. I was sad about that. I almost cried about that. But you know what I mean? I was in such a strange headspace that night. But 39, the Queen has often played it in concert, and it was always just an acoustic guitar and Freddie singing, or an acoustic guitar and Brian singing. Sometimes Roger Taylor might just have a bass drum, but basically it was stripped down, just acoustic song. For the first time, he had it scored for an orchestra. So it was Brian singing with the Hans Zimmer Orchestra. It was beautiful. That video, I believe, is online. Not much of the opening ceremony is online yet, but that is. And Brian's voice was fantastic, and it was so beautiful, with an orchestra and a 32-piece choir also singing in the chorus. So yeah, it's pretty tear-jerking. It was pretty phenomenal. It's an amazing song. The Human Developmental Series. I don't know. Sculptures of the Human Developmental Series? All right, so how about this? You want to get a taste of what Jill Tarter is like? Here's a bit of my interview with her. And interestingly, if I let it play long enough, Chase Masterson is far in the background because we're just in the hotel and an area, there's some traffic, and you'll see Richard Dawkins walk by at one point, and a guy named John Logsdon, who is a pretty well-known space historian. So here's some of my interview with Jill Tarter, the amazing Jill Tarter.
So, my name is Jill Tarter. In 1984, I co-founded a nonprofit called the SETI Institute. SETI is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And my colleagues at the SETI Institute and I are passionate about trying to understand whether there is life beyond Earth. And in particular, I'm more interested in the mathematicians than the microbes, so I'm looking for technologically capable life.
Right, I was going to say, because your method won't detect life, only technological radio wave using life.
That's right, but if our planet is any example, there is a spectrum, a broad spectrum of life, and detection methods for some are different than the detection methods for others. And it's really, when we ask this old human question of, are we alone? There's a bias in there.
That's okay.
So there's a bias in that question, whether we realize it or not. And most of the time we're asking, is there anybody else that we can talk to out there, right? Understanding life and the different ways to make biology, fantastic question. Really really, really interesting. But, we love to talk about ourselves. We love to put ourselves in the picture. So, deep down, fundamental, when we ask the "are we alone" question, it's a loaded question. We want to know about others.
I've heard some astrophysicists suggest that we might be the only intelligent life in our entire galaxy. Do you come down on that side?
I don't know what the answer is, right? But when there is so much uncertainty that, as we would say in the sciences, the error bars are in the exponent, powers of 10, huge numbers of powers of 10 that we are uncertain by, that's a problem that is going to yield not to theory, but to experiment and observation. So I think we just need to go look.
We're in Zurich, Switzerland at the Starmus 5 Festival. What is Starmus?
Starmus is stars and music. It is the brainchild of Garrick Israelian, who is an astrophysicist and also a very creative individual. So he and Brian May, guitarist for Queen, got together a long time ago, more than a decade ago now, and began to think about how we could put these two spheres of human endeavor together. And Starmus was born, and Garrick does the intellectual talks, organizes that piece of it, and Brian organizes the fantastic musical concerts and video arts. So it's a terrific event because cosmonauts, astronauts, Nobel laureates, and some of the rest of us who get to come along, right? Fabulous talks on subjects where people are encouraged to go beyond the science and into the human piece of their work and the implications for their investigations for the rest of the world.
So this is not your first time at Starmus?
No, this is not my first time. I've been here since Starmus 1.
Oh, so you've attended all 5?
I did miss number
Okay.
2, but the rest of them I've been there. I love it. I mean, it's
So
really great.
why do you keep returning?
Oh, right. I mean, I don't get to rub shoulders with Nobel laureates and cosmonauts and astronauts every day. Given the opportunity, you find out they're spectacular people. Obviously, they're very accomplished. But not only that, they're very interesting. So it's a good crowd to hang with.
I love today Nicole Stott's presentation. She's an astronaut who's been to the ISS. In fact, the one space shuttle launch I attended was hers, STS-133,
okay.
And she's an artist. And Al Warden's presentation the other day, where he read poetry that he wrote after his missions.
Al's a cool guy. Yes, I knew him from NASA Ames for a long time.
That's wonderful. So you are also a board member of Starmus. When did you join the board of Starmus?
As soon as Garrick twisted my arm.
So, it's hard for me to tell. I didn't really prepare that. I didn't edit it. But there's Jill Tarter and a bit of our conversation from Starmus. And she's pretty cool. Chuck, you asked a question. Hey, Tassie Callis. Haney. I don't know that as part of your name, but I guess that's okay. Eric. Yes. The next Starmus, you know what? Each time they have it, it's such an overwhelming experience that there's no certainty that there will be another one. But they've been about every 2 years. So it was last June, and so it probably won't happen this summer, but I sure hope it happens again, and I sure hope I get to be involved again. I would love to co-host. So, hey Craig, hey Mike. Mike asked if I was a Cub Scout. I was not a Cub Scout. Not a lot of Jews are Cub Scouts. I think we knew better. Alan, hey Bruce. Hey Jennifer Hahn-Rennie. I'm doing some experimenting with live streaming, and I'm actually streaming simultaneously to my 2 Facebook pages and my YouTube and LinkedIn and Twitter right now. So we'll see how this turns out. And Chuck, you asked a question about, unfortunately, my conversation with her was very short, so we didn't get deep. I wanted to talk to her a little bit about Starmus, a little bit about SETI. She went on to mention that one of the highlights is in one or two of the previous Starmus incarnations, Stephen Hawking was there. And so it really is neat to see all these various rock stars of science or music and how they feel about the other people that were there. Like the rock stars like Brian May and Steve Vai are so gaga over the scientists, and the scientists are gaga over them. It's really a beautiful thing. And so we didn't, I mean, they've had new themes, and like this last one, because it was the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. This is why they had 7 Apollo astronauts, and I can't remember, 3 or 4 were moonwalkers. Charlie Duke, Buzz Aldrin, the one scientist. I've even he was on the he was one of the last men on the moon, and he's a geologist, and he's also a climate change denier. So I can't think of his name, even though I have a short interview with him as well. But I got to speak to Buzz Aldrin for a few minutes, or rather, he spoke at me. I got a couple photos just because my friend Chase saw him talking at me, and she snapped a couple pictures. So they weren't posed; they were in action of Buzz very intensely talking to me about something. But Harrison Schmidt, thank you. So I'm thinking there was one other moonwalker, but Al Warden is one of the guys that made the trip to the moon but had to stay in the car while the other 2 went down. Al Warden was amazing. He is such a cool guy. And he read poetry that he had written in the wake of his missions, and it was really good. So it was very interesting. I don't know who else is out there now, and if you have any questions, don't know when the next Starmus will be, hopefully soon. We could check out a little of this Steve Vai. Steve Vai was super cool. I almost embarrassed that I didn't really know his music before. Of course I knew who he was. Here's something funny. There was a dress rehearsal just hours before the show, but the day before, at another site in a rehearsal space, there was a rehearsal. The orchestra was there, and me and my co-host, Chase, were meeting with the woman who was running the opening ceremony. And we had just gotten together to discuss the run-through. And before we got started, she got a phone call, and she said, Brian May just arrived. Do you want to go down? And this is really our first day in town. And he goes, do you want to go down and see some of the rehearsal? So we tabled our discussion, and we went down and watched Brian rehearse with the orchestra. And they played 39 and Who Wants to Live Forever. And we left before he had done, in the show, he would do 3 songs, and the last one was We Are the Champions. But we had to go have our meeting instead of watching that. But did get to see him do 39 and Who Wants to Live Forever. And there was a guy, especially on Who Wants to Live Forever, not on 39, there was a guy playing guitar. I didn't even realize it was Steve Vai. He was, on that rehearsal day, he was very unassuming. He had a baseball cap on. His hair was tied back. The next day at the show, he looked like such a rock star. But that day, he was dressed down, and I didn't recognize him. He had glasses on and the cap, and he was playing this white guitar. And it just was, I just remember going, why is that guy playing guitar instead of Brian? And I had no idea. And now I have some footage from that I've looked back at, and I'm like, oh my God, that was Steve Vai the whole time. So it's pretty funny. Oh, I know. Yeah, I mean, do you know Queen has always been my favorite band, going back to junior high. So I've worshipped them. I had posters of them on my wall. And so it was no light thing to have any contact with him and to sit there and just feed away from him in an orchestra. But here's the thing, and also before they got started, when he first walked in, he had his iPhone out and he was taking selfies with, with the orchestra behind him, taking pictures of the orchestra and selfies with the orchestra behind him. It's pretty fun to watch. Maybe I don't know what the highlight of the week was, but it was 5-6 days. It was really solid. And I got to spend a lot of time with Steve Vai and some other people. I didn't get a lot of time with Brian May, but I had one moment that was amazing, and it was that first day at the rehearsal, because he had recently become friendly with my co-host, Chase. And for about a year, he's been following me on Instagram. Do you know this? And it's all because of stereo photography. So on Instagram, there's a community of stereo photography enthusiasts. He created this community because he's been passionate about it since childhood. He's been he acquired the London Stereoscopic Company that existed in the 1850s. It's his company now, and in the past 10 years, they've put out about 10 books. One is Queen in 3D. The others are historical. They're collections of stereo cards from the 1800s and early 1900s, and they're works of scholarship. They're very interesting. And they had there was a Queen show in London, and I now have a stereo camera that I can't show you right now, but they had a contest that they often do. And from these Queen shows in London, send us your best stereo photos. And I had taken some phenomenal ones, and I won the contest, and he started following me. And he sometimes comments on my posts. When I posted my little 3-minute interview with Harrison Schmidt, he saw that. And mostly it's science related or stereo photo ones, and he'll sometimes make a comment, just like cool or something. So he'd been following me for about a year. There's a break during the rehearsal, and he comes over to say hi to Chase and give her a big hug. And when they're finished greeting, she goes, I don't remember exactly what she said, if she said, this is science comedian Brian Mallow, or this is Brian Mallow. And he looked at me and he goes, oh, I'm sorry I didn't recognize you. Brian May said that to me. He's like, oh, I'm sorry I didn't recognize you. I see your stuff online all the time. It's brilliant. You know the English overuse that word brilliant. But that moment was so surreal. Brian acting like he should have recognized me. Pretty insane. So, oh yeah, we can talk about stereo photography. Starting with taking sequentials, where you can take 2 shots and put them together, but you can only do still lifes in that case because things move, until I finally bought a stereo camera. Fuji made one for a couple years. They discontinued it because not that many people bought them, but I got one on eBay. Originally it was like $700 or something. I paid about $3, and I have a lot of fun with it. It's a pretty fun hobby. So, haha, Albert. Hey, Chad, if you're still out there. Has anyone at Starmus talked about creating music in space besides Hadfield? I don't know, but there was a lot of talk about making art in space. There's a famous old Russian cosmonaut who just passed away. He was the first human to walk in space. I met his daughter there, and I met Neil Armstrong's son. That was so cool. Alexei Leonev, the first human to walk in space, and he's like he's a Russian hero, and he only passed away within the past year, since Starmus, and he's an artist, and he created some art while he was in space. And this Nicole Stott is an American who, the one space shuttle launch I saw, you may have heard me say this to Jill Tarter, I saw one space shuttle launch, and I just met one of the astronauts that was on it, and I showed her a picture. I go, I showed her a picture that I'd taken, and it's like, that's your shuttle launch. And she has a big nonprofit that has something to do with art and science. So a lot of astronauts, and like I said, Al Worden wrote poetry. So I don't know about other musicians, but there's been a lot of the intersection of art and space. Chad, oh yeah, Lane, he was an artist. They even, at Starmus, they use a piece of art he drew. They created a Stephen Hawking Medal of Science Communication. And they use a piece of art that Lane created, and you can look it up. You can find some pictures of him holding up some art. Chad Lehrman asked me if I have any good Mitch Hedberg stories. And Mitch Hedberg, for those of you who don't know, was a comedian who tragically died of multiple drug toxicity at a very young age, less than 40, I'm pretty sure. And there was a period where he was one of my best friends for a bunch of years before the heroin. And we had a lot of adventures. We went to a lot of places. You know what? We made a movie that's called Los Enchiladas. It got into Sundance, but then nothing really happened with it. It's only been shown at some tributes to Mitch. I've hosted a couple, co-hosted with his widow and his family, and I brought some home video footage I had of him. And when we were making this movie in Minnesota, where he grew up, I remember there was this isn't really funny, but we joined a gym. We spent a summer there making it, basically, or more than a month or two. And we got a gym membership, and once we were on treadmills next to each other, and I think I was running and he was walking, and we were joking about how I should be passing him because I'm running and he's only walking. But we were on treadmills next to each other. And Mitch was amazing at coming up with new material from something that had happened that day. And we had spent the day together. It was very frustrating because we had spent the day together, and then he has this new joke, and it's like, I was there too, and I didn't have that new joke. And somewhere this is on video, I think, because we were doing some crappy gigs in Nevada, and we were shooting a lot of video, and there was a part where he was putting me on the spot, and I was in a relationship that wasn't going to last very much longer, and I wasn't that happy in it, but I wasn't breaking it off. And so on camera, he starts asking me about it, but I didn't want to talk about that personal stuff on camera. And so I shied away from it, and he started giving me hell because I had been ranting about conspiracy stuff and the government. Why don't they tell us about this? And I won't even talk about my girlfriend. So I don't know. I'm sure here's something. One time we were, I think, in Colorado. Mitch liked to mock people in a funny way. And there was one time in particular that we're hanging out with people, and he and I kept using language that we would never use, like, don't go there, Brian. And so imagine Mitch saying all these cliche things that you would never hear him say. Because we didn't, talk to the hand and that kind of stuff. And the people we were with didn't know it was sarcastic. And that was the point. I don't know. I probably have better stories than that. Some of them are perhaps not appropriate for this show, but. All right, so let's run a clip. You want to see what, so there was the rehearsal day, and I didn't even quite know that was Steve Vai yet, and I didn't see him do anything. He just played a little bit on Who Wants to Live Forever, but it wasn't like a big jam. It's just kind of mellow. The next day, the day of the show, we have like hours of rehearsal before the show. And one of the first things I get to see is Steve Vai playing with the Hans Zimmer Orchestra, this song of his called For the Love of God. And again, I knew that during the show, since I was co-hosting, there's no way that I would be able to shoot anything. I was gonna be busy and working. But here, I could go to the front of the stage and walk right up, and so you'll see, I'll just play some of it, because I didn't get the very beginning, but the first thing I got is pretty awesome, and we can listen to him play for a few minutes, but it goes on for probably 7 minutes. But here's a little of Steve Vai jamming at rehearsal for the Starmus opening ceremony this past summer. What do you think? That's just a little taste. I didn't have a good angle on that, but he plays part of it with his tongue, because why not? Why wouldn't you? So he was pretty amazing, and I have some of an interview with him as well. Chad says, thanks. You were at the Cobb's tribute I hosted? Excellent. I hosted one at the Houston, it was called the Laugh Stop when I started comedy there, but it's the Cap City Comedy Club. Russ Forbes, that was Rick Wakeman on the keyboards. Rick Wakeman from Yes. and Steve Vai and the Hans Zimmer Orchestra, 45-piece orchestra, 32-piece choir. Hey, Mike Krieger, if you're out there. Hi, Mike. And Albert says you need a PA for the event. I'm very affordable. I know, Chuck. And not only that, he was super nice. Don't you love that? You know the thing where they say don't meet your heroes? Brian May, to all reports, is super kind to everyone, to animals even. He's a huge animal rights activist, and Brian has said in recent years he'd rather be known for having an effect on how non-human species are treated on Earth than for his music. Of course, he already has the music part sewn up, so he doesn't even have to worry about that. I feel like 1,000 years from now, how much pop music might survive, if there is 1,000 years from now, and there are humans. I feel like We Will Rock You will survive, but none of the lyrics, just the boom, boom, ksh. I think that 1,000 years from now, that'll still be done at tournaments and such, but the lyrics will be long lost. Eric Marr says, like Coltrane or Hendrik Vai ascends. You know, did you know this? So when Steve Vai was a kid, like 16, 17, he has a great music theory background, and he transcribed some Frank Zappa music and sent the transcriptions to Zappa, and that got him a job at about 17 years old with Frank Zappa. That was his first gig. And he told me about meeting Brian May when he was nobody. He was playing with Frank Zappa, but he was nobody. He's a kid, and Frank Zappa had a big band with prominent musicians, but Steve was just no one, in his own words. And this is in the interview, but he met Brian, and Brian was so kind to him and invited him. He saw him at a bar, and he invited him to their rehearsal the next day. And he went, and there was the whole band, and then Brian let him play his guitar through his amp. And maybe we'll just have to watch some of that. Chuck says, is that a cycling Mannheim in the background? I don't know. What Coltrane are, did I miss any other questions? Yeah, so I really like that. So obviously I really wanted some more Brian May hang time, but I don't think he stayed at the same hotel that we were at. But Steve Vai and the cosmonaut who has spent more time in space than any other human, he's done 5 missions. I think he did 2 visits to the Mir space station and 3 to the ISS. And I forget his name, but he has more time in space. I feel like it's 2.5 years cumulatively over 5 missions. At the end of this amazing day at the venue, we'd come back to the hotel, and in the hotel lobby and bar, there's Steve Vai and Brian Eno. Brian Eno talking to the filmmakers that made the new Apollo 11 documentary, in particular the guy that did the soundtrack, and they're geeking out on synthesizer stuff. And there's Steve Vai talking to someone, and there's this cosmonaut that has more time in space than anyone else, and then Alexei Leonid's daughter is sitting there, and it was all pretty surreal. It was pretty amazing. And I gotta say that Steve was just super kind. Hey, David Spark, I'm doing some live streaming experiments harkening back to 20 years ago in San Francisco. It's no longer, NC is not Northern California, it's North Carolina, as Chuck pointed out for me. Who just did that? What was the most unexpected thing you experienced at Starmus? There was so much, but I already told you that one thing. Brian May acting like he should have recognized me. That's pretty hard to beat. So Peter Gabriel had participated in a previous one. They knew he was, and at the last minute, he was coming to it, but they didn't know if he was gonna perform. If he performed, well, my co-host Chase was gonna introduce him, and he'd come on stage, and he was at least gonna speak, and that's all he did. If he had performed, I was gonna get to go, Peter Gabriel, ladies and gentlemen. But I think I already told you this too. While I was on stage, like interviewing Chris Hadfield for a couple minutes, or Rick Wakeman or Steve Vai, or introducing someone, looking out, and Brian Eno and Peter Gabriel were sitting next to each other in the front row, and just down the row were all the Apollo astronauts, including Buzz Aldrin. That was really hard to take in. Oh, I wish I had this photo to show you. Rick Wakeman, another unbelievably sweet and kind man. And we took a selfie together, and he's like leaning, it looks like our engagement photo. And I'll tell you what, I can show it to you sort of, and I want to, because, so since I was gonna be bringing him on, he and I got to chat a lot. Oh, here's somebody that was there. You know who this is? That's Robert Wilson, who discovered the cosmic microwave background radiation. He was one of the 12 Nobel laureates there. It was funny to me to say these were not run-of-the-mill Nobel laureates, because it was the guys that discovered cosmic microwave background radiation, the guys that discovered that not only is the universe expanding, but it's expanding at an accelerating rate, and Barry Barish and Kip Thorne that were awarded the prize for gravitational waves. So these were like kind of astounding. This is me and Charlie Duke, who walked on the moon. This is the low-tech way of oh, this is Michel, I forget his last name, but he would win his Nobel Prize a few months after Starmus, Michel Mayor. His team discovered the first exoplanet. And so there were a dozen Nobel laureates and one guy that was about to be a Nobel laureate. I have an interview with Barry Barish. That's Alexei Leonid's daughter. She was also super kind, and we're totally follow each other on Instagram now. And this is the amazing Brian Eno. This is my low-tech slideshow. But this is all to get to, we're backstage waiting for me to bring Rick Wakeman onto the stage. And we're just having great conversation in between the acts. He was telling me old stories about touring with Yes and everything. And then we took a photo, and it's like, I'm serious. That's our engagement photo, isn't it? Is that the cutest thing? And I gotta tell you, he was the kindest man. Somebody scared me the other day. I was at a gig, and I mentioned him, and they go, oh, he just died. And she was wrong. I think she meant Rick Ocasek. But for a few minutes, I was like, no! Because he was just super, super, super cool. Somebody color corrected this for me, but there's one of my Brian May selfies, but we had a stage light, red light on us, so, and so Peter Gabriel, I didn't, at the very end of the opening ceremony, he was right next to me, and I didn't want to lose him in the madness, so we weren't even off the stage yet when I got him to take a picture with me, and yes, that is Brian May's distinctive head right behind us, but I think we got two. And so Peter Gabriel, that's pretty epic. And I did get to talk to him for a few minutes. And then Hans Zimmer, who also I'm now more of a fan of than ever. So there's some tech that I didn't expect to use for my slideshow. Hey, Lori Finkelstein. And hey, Phil. So Steve Vai was so super cool. Before I wrap this up, if you didn't see this before, let me give you this. This only happened, I'm the only person who has this. because it only happened in the rehearsal and not during the show, here's a snippet of the astronaut, Commander Chris Hadfield, playing Space Oddity, and Steve Vai, and this is better than the studio version.
Detach from the station and make us love be with you.
I don't get tired of that. That's so. I think it's just better than the orchestral version on the studio version. Chuck said the top flight of music and astro. Yeah. So not only were there 7 Apollo astronauts, there were a bunch of modern astronauts too, male and female. There's a guy that worked for SpaceX, and now his name is Garrett Reisman. And he's an astronaut who's been to the ISS, and then he worked for SpaceX, but I think he's moved on to something else now. Alan Stern was there, the head of the New Horizons. He headed up many missions in the past, but he's been head of the New Horizons mission that passed Pluto and then whatever they renamed Ultima Thule. Mallow Imperial Aerosol Kid. Hey, Eric, I get that Genesis reference. Is that from The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway? Yeah, I have a lot to share. And that's why, like I said, I have these ugly watermark because I'm the only person who has that. So I just threw my name on there just to make it ugly. Excuse me for that. But before we go, let's get a little taste of how nice Steve Vai is. And this is us sitting there. I'm using a selfie stick and an iPhone, but we do have lavalier mics on, so the audio is pretty good. And here's a little taste of what Steve Vai is like. He's super cool. Yeah, I think there are a lot of connections between artists and scientists. For one thing, artists and scientists, comedians, we don't usually have our eye on a retirement age, 65. Because we're loving, you don't want to retire, do you?
The moment I first set eyes on a guitar, and I understood the concept of composing music, I knew that how do you retire?
Yeah.
When you can continue to entertain yourself by being creative with little black dots. I mean, at some point this will go away.
How young did you start with that instrument of yours? Was it did you dabble in piano or drums first before you found your way to the guitar?
I grew up in Italian on Long Island, so of course I played the accordion when I was 9 years old.
Of course. Brian May started on ukulele because his father taught him, yeah.
That's right, he told me that. And then I in high school I played the tuba because they
Really?
needed one.
Where's that video footage?
Right? Yeah. Except my friends would use it as a big bong.
Yeah, and then play it.
And then play it.
Smoke through it, then play it.
Yeah. But I
we
started
can edit
playing,
that in post.
Yeah. But well, not these days.
No.
But I started playing when I was 12.
Okay.
And I always wanted to play since I was about 6. But the guitar always just seemed to be this almost like untouchable, precious thing,
I understand.
It took me a while. It wasn't until I heard Led Zeppelin.
Really? Yeah.
Led Zeppelin 2, and then Queen.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was first. So you get the music that your brothers and sisters or parents.
Did you have
listen
older
to.
siblings?
Oh yeah, yeah.
See, I always regretted that I was the oldest, so I didn't have a cool, an older sibling to turn me on to cool music.
Well, you had the responsibility of turning your younger siblings onto it.
I failed a little.
Well, I hear you like Queen too, so you couldn't have been doing that bad.
Yes, yeah. So how early did you come in to discover Queen?
Well, like I said, I was very, when I first found rock and roll, it was like Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
And my sister was listening like that, and Alice Cooper.
Oh, yeah.
And this kind of stuff, and it was just, wow. Yeah. But then my friend John Sergio, and this is just one of my greatest musical awakenings, was meeting John, because he turned me on to Queen. He took me to my first concert, which was a Queen concert. Well, that was my second concert.
What was your first?
Led Zeppelin.
You
don't even know.
Wow.
Yeah,
And this must have been early 70s?
Oh, yeah. It was even before the song Remains the Same, and then But an interesting Queen story. We went into the city, New York City, because I was on Long Island, and I could not believe that we were going to actually see Queen, because that music, when I heard it, it was otherworldly. Yeah. It was so authentic and powerful and
what era
sincere.
is this?
How old are you? I'm 59.
So their first album came out in '73.
Yeah, it was the second album. That's
Queen
when I
2.
found them. Yeah, Queen 2, and that was it. And we went to see them, and I'll just never forget, because I studied Brian so much, and his guitar, the Red Special. That was like a incredible phenomenon, that guitar.
Which, if people don't know,
yeah,
it's
he built it himself
with his father from raw material. I mean, custom built from the bottom up.
And it's got more tonalities and dimension in it than any conventional guitar I've ever seen. Yeah. And so that was a great concert. And I remember standing out in the corner when they drove by in the car and waved, and I was like, wow.
Yeah.
But the most extraordinary thing was when I was 20, I moved out to California, and I was working for Frank Zappa. But like the first week I got there, I went down to the notorious Rainbow Bar and Grill, where everybody hangs out, all the rock stars hang out. And I walk in the bar, and there's Brian May standing at the bar by himself. And I thought, it was a shock. And I worked up all the courage I could to just go up and say hi. And he was so sweet. He was so kind and so concerned, and, gives you his attention. And I was just a fan. I didn't have any reputation or anything. And he actually invited me to a Queen rehearsal the next day, which was a shocker. Yeah. And I went there, and there's Freddie, and there's everybody, and there's Brian's amp setup, and there's his guitar. And I'm looking at it. It kind of seems surreal. Yeah. And I'm saying, that's it, right? And he goes, yeah, that's it. You want to try it? And I'm like, so I'm going to play his guitar that he recorded Olga Battle and all that, beautiful. And to my chagrin, it did not sound like Brian May when I was playing it.
Even though it was his guitar.
Yeah, it was
and playing through his amp.
His everything. No, his tone is in his head. And Brian, so he's very artistic and very specific in intuitive, musically intuitive ways. And he does the same with his study of science. He knows when it feels right to him, and he knows when it's wrong. And that's why the Red Special is such a spectacular guitar.
To a non-musician or guitarist, that's fascinating stuff to hear, that it's not just, it is a unique guitar, but the sound isn't just all in the guitar. No. How is it that the player can influence the sound that much? I mean, I'm sure it's the same with world-class
because your sound,
violinist.
Of course, the guitar and the amp and these kinds of things have they definitely have an effect on the tone, but the actual sound that comes out, the personality of the sound, it's in your head. Yeah. It's in the musician's head. It's your tone is based on how you hear yourself in your mind and what you're personally seeking for. So you create, you kind of, and I try to explain this because it's a very powerful way to develop your tone, because most musicians, they get a guitar, they go, okay, and they play, but it's in the way you touch the instrument. It's in the way so many variables, the way you hold the pick, the way you vibrate, how hard you hit, how hard you hold the pick, all of these variables, and the thing that guides them is your ear. So you have to project into an audio dimension that doesn't really exist yet. You have to listen in your own mind. And if you can hear the kind of tone you're looking for, then your hands automatically, naturally, instinctually find it, because they're connected. You own them, and you're telling them with your subconscious when you're listening what to do to make that tone. And when you watch someone like Brian, oh my God, I mean, there's so much. Every note has its own zip code. Yeah. Even when he plays these big, rich, thick, heavy, distorted chords, every note has its own bell-like quality. and his vibrato. I was watching him I played with him many times now, but watching him very closely, there's just, it's that inexplicable magic that just flows into an instrument that some artists have, and it's so apparent in him.
You know, again, I'm not a musician, so I don't quite have the language for it, but one thing I noticed about your playing is something that you have in common with Brian is you both can make big, nasty, loud, crunchy sounds.
Oh, you're getting me randy, bro.
Yes, but you both also can play the most delicate, beautiful, melodic stuff, like that range. Like, not every guitarist can have that full of range, I imagine.
Well, it's based on what their interests are.
Yeah.
But I've always wanted to have that deep kind of dynamic.
Is the light coming
Yeah,
down?
well, you might have to edit here. Because
I think you gotta like.
We got a little motion sensor.
Yeah, it's a
We
motion
sat so still that the room gave up on us. The room no longer believed we were here. We're talking.
we're entering a
Steve
black
Vai.
hole.
So, you know, it's so funny that, you know, we're being fanboys here. This whole event, so the scale of it is amazing. There are about 60 or so VIPs, speakers and artists.
Yeah.
And they're Nobel laureates.
Yeah.
And they're the people that discovered gravitational waves. They discovered the fact that the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate.
Yeah, I was
they
in the-
discovered
I
the
was-
cosmic microwave background radiation.
Yeah.
And then
I was in the elevator with a guy that very nice, you know, we're talking, and I said, so what do you do? And he said, well, I discovered the origins of life on the planet.
So yes,
I know how to play Bohemian Rhapsody.
you wrote a few songs too.
But the great thing about Starmus is,
And there have been Apollo astronauts, you know, the three guys that walked on the moon, Buzz Aldrin. But I've noticed that everyone seems to have a little, there's a lot of geeking out on each other.
Yeah.
That we're talking about Brian here, but the scientists like meeting the musicians and the other scientists and
well, you know, Starmus is such an extraordinary and unique festival, so to speak, because it's like 6 days, and you have some of the most brilliant people in the world. I think we have 11 Nobel laureates here. And how many astronauts?
I think we have 20. Yeah, so I'm not going to play the whole thing right now, but there's so much more good stuff in there with Steve Vai. That's at Starmus in a dressing room. While this was like day 4 or 5, and I was emceeing that day, and there was a program on stage, and this was the only time that Steve and I could carve out to do this. So while there was a program happening, we ducked in and talked for about 35 minutes, and then I had to stop it so that I could get back on stage and bring on the next act. But he was so nice and so cool. And then Albert and Chuck, there's more there's more of Steve and I geeking out on Queen 2, and Good Company from A Night at the Opera. Chuck, are you familiar with that song? I don't know if you're still out there, but Good Company, he and I and his friend, who's that other guitarist? Nuno Betancourt, another great guitarist. We all hold this song Good Company up. It's because, as he says, it's something like the finest achievement in sound design or sound sculpting by a guitarist. Because if you just hear the song, you may just think it's a cute song, but you might not appreciate that all of these sounds in it that sound like horns are all different guitars, and he geeks out on that. I should queue up, I should get that clip specifically, because it's so cool to hear, because not being a musician or guitarist, to hear a professional who has the same opinion as you, but his opinion is informed by the fact that he's Steve Vai, it was very amazing, and it was so much fun to talk to him about that song and other stuff. So, yeah, I made Steve, I love that. When I was saying the nasty, crunchy sounds, and he goes, "You're making me randy, Brian." That was pretty funny. So this has been fun. I'll be curious to see if it came out everywhere. While one of those was playing, I went over to try to see if it's on LinkedIn. I didn't see it there, but supposedly I'm streaming to my LinkedIn, unless I failed to set that one up properly. But I'll be very curious to see, Albert, if when this is all over, if it's still in sync on the iPhone. I changed one or two things. You know what else I'm doing? Did you see this? I'm wearing an earpiece this time because now I can hear the little piano music. And I'm only wearing one because it was way too distracting to have both on. I didn't like the way it muffles my hearing. I don't even like the one in, but I had to be able to hear the interviews. I guess I could have put it on during the interviews, but anyway. This has been an interesting... My LinkedIn is not LinkedIn. Yeah, apparently. So it'll be real interesting to see if this is in sync later, but I'm in sync now, right? When I talk. So I'm gonna try to solve that tech mystery, but let's wrap it up. Those were the clips. We could go out. Unfortunately, like if I play one of those other Steve Vai clips again, it's going to start at the beginning. It's just the nature of the way I have it set up, unless I prepare some individual clips. But I think that went well. So that was the new test tonight of setting up some clips to play. And now I could make a better if I want to watermark that footage, I can do it less assuming. I can add some transparency to the text. I didn't have a chance to do that. But if I do it in Final Cut, I can do that. But there's some other things I'm gonna want to experiment with, including the green screen soon, which I already know what's coming and I'm excited to share it with you. So thank you very much. I think that was a fun experiment and I'm gonna go see how it all turned out. So we'll fade to black and then we'll cut it. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for participating. This was fun. I'll see you later.